All right, so welcome to Bronx Community Board 8 Special Committee on the Hudson River Greenway meeting. My name is Bob Bender. I chair this special committee. I'm here with two other committee members, Laura Spalter and Deborah Travis, and also with our speaker for this evening, Jerry Bogas. We have a quorum, which I am very happy to see. The agenda calls for roll call, but I think we've just done the roll call, so we can move on from there. Yeah, and David Gelman, our fourth committee member, is here on Zoom and is occupied with other community board business at the present time. So that's where we are, and the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting of this committee, which was on January 30th of last year.
Motion to approve. Second.
No comments, okay? All right, let it be noted that the minutes were approved unanimously. I should say this committee meets irregularly, and it meets only when there really is a reason to meet. I wish that we had reason to meet more often, meaning that I wish that there was a lot more going on with the Hudson River Greenway. But it's going along slowly. I'm always reminded of, when it comes to this committee, of the classic definition of how a person becomes bankrupt, which is slowly and then suddenly. And I think that's going to be the case for the Hudson River Greenway in the Bronx. We're still in the slowly phase, but someday it's going to happen. So having shared that personal observation, let's move on to the next item, which is introduction of our speaker, Jerry Bogas, who's here tonight with us, who is with the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, NMTIC, and who wants to share with us some information, which we are grateful to have. And should we call up the screen share at this point, Jerry?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think I need to share this, right?
All right, so can everybody see the screen? Can everybody see Hudson River Valley Greenway link?
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
All right, Jerry, you want to take it from here?
Sure, thanks, Bob. And Bob and I have been talking fairly regularly over the past several months. I just want to report back to the committee about a special meeting that was held on January 19th at the request of Councilman Dinowitz, Assemblyman Dinowitz, and State Senator Rivera.
Right.
And they had requested, as I suggested to Bob, that any requests go to the co-chairs of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, and they requested a meeting to discuss the status of the Greenway. For those of you who don't know, NMTIC, as it's called, is a regional council, and we have membership from New York City, from 5 suburban counties, the state, the MTA, and organizations like this exist to bring federal dollars into a metropolitan region. So
Jerry, could you speak up a little bit, please?
Sorry, David. Is this any better?
Not really.
Better,
Or
David?
maybe move one of the mic, slide one of the mics over to you.
Is this the mic?
I think it's a camera and a mic. I thought we're both.
Yeah. Is this any better, David?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, I hear him just fine.
Great. So we pulled together a special meeting because of that, and we included the following participants in that meeting. The 3 elected officials, actually 2 of them attended in person. It was a virtual meeting. Well, in person, it's in 2 dimensions. And Senator Rivera sent his constituent leader. We had New York City DOT, New York City Parks at the meeting, New York State DOT, Westchester County had a representative, the city of Yonkers, and Bob, and I guess Cliff, you were representing actually the Friends of the Greenway, although you also have the community board hat. So this was on January 19th, it was a Friday, and, we'll get into the purpose of the meeting. I'm not gonna show the whole presentation that we did that night, but, just some of the key parts. And, starting with, if I could,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
I can do this?
yeah, go for it.
Oops, no.
Try just clicking, what is it? If you, and next.
Jerry, if I could interject for
working.
just a moment. I also made note that we had representatives from city planning in New York and New York City, and also from EDC, the Economic Development Corporation.
That's a good point, yes.
Yeah.
They came, last minute, so to speak.
Mhm.
So one of the things we did was to put together this, which is the tortured history of attempts to link the greenways from Manhattan to Yonkers, basically. And we're not gonna go through this in detail, but you can see there've been a number of things that have happened over the past 30, almost 5 years. Including a 2014 study, the Hudson River Valley Greenway Link, which was led by, I was actually the project manager for that. The request was made of NIMTIC to do that study since no one agency has jurisdiction over the areas that we were looking at. So we completed that after several years. And then in 2018, at the behest of the community board, this committee, I believe, right, Bob?
Mhm.
The MTA did a feasibility study of a shorter version of the Greenway in 2018. So, it's been a lot of things happening over time, but I think Bob is correct that this isn't exactly at light speed. So, and I just want to show the next slide because it really kind of underscores, sorry, I don't know why I can't do that. One more, maybe we do page down. Okay, so this is the missing link. And so over here on the left, we have the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway, which ends at Inwood Hill Park. And over here on the right, roughly in this area here, we have the whole old Croton Aqueduct Trail in Yonkers. And this area, to link the two, has the Harlem River Ship Canal, and a lot of topographical issues here along the waterfront next to the Metro North line, and of course Riverdale Park is down here, and local streets here, and you have to get across the Ship Canal and blah, 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 past the sewage treatment plant and then up into the local streets of Yonkers. So there's a reason why this is a missing link, and that is, it's a very, very difficult area, very difficult area. So, I did give an overview of the 2014 study and talked about the fact that that study was focused on the goal of closing the gap between the Manhattan Waterfront Greenway and the old Croton Aqueduct Trail. And the community had told us in the public involvement that was done that the community goal was to stay as close to the waterfront as possible for as long as possible, understanding the physical barriers to getting down there. But that was what the community was most interested in. So it did recommend a phasing plan for waterfront alignment, a total of 14 discrete capital projects, which I won't go through tonight, short, medium, and long term, and at a cost of something over $100 million at that time, to get down to the waterfront, stay there, and move into Yonkers. And this is one part of it from Manhattan to the Bronx, and this is the other part from Bronx into Yonkers. So they're pretty involved, using local streets at least part of the time, and again, establishing the waterfront as soon as possible, but also staying there as long as possible. The Greenway feasibility study we talked about next, which was completed in 2018, it was conducted by MTA Metro North. And it established the feasibility of a more limited greenway from the Spuyten Duyvil station to the Ludlow station in Yonkers. So it wasn't the complete link, but it was mostly at the waterfront. And you can barely see it there. I'm sorry, I had to clip this out of a screenshot. But the results of the study were that developing a trail in this area would be feasible. However, the design and construction of a potential walkway would have to overcome serious locational and engineering challenges presented by the project area. So that was Metro North acknowledging that, yeah, with enough money and you could do it. You could do it even with a working railroad there, which has been actually confirmed twice now. So, at that point, everything sort of, here was alternative one from that particular study. Again, look at the total projected cost of that alternative, 98.1 million. And then there was a second alternative at 80.6 million. So, whatever is done in this area is gonna be costly, you know, it's not an easy place to construct this, for a number of reasons, including the railroad and the topography. So, and then finally, we kind of closed it up by saying, well, what is the current status at this point? So that you have multiple jurisdictions, it's not in a park, but city parks is involved. It's not actually, other than the right of way for the railroad, it's not really a transportation facility, but DOT is involved. Of course, you have the working railroad there. You have the city of Yonkers on the other side and the county of Westchester. And you have city planning and the Greenways plan. So, which we did discuss at the meeting also. Ted Wright was there to provide an overview of the city's Greenway plan and where this fits or doesn't fit in that. There's also an uncertain project scope because there's a number of different ways to do this. It depends on how much is available to be spent and, you know, how much, local streets are used for at least part of the path. Coordination with the railroad must be revisited. The MTA Hudson Line resilience enhancements are in the MTA's capital program. And that includes, resilience work in the area we're talking about. So, I believe Jeff Dinowitz did say that he had spoken to Janet Lieber and suggested that the MTA at least be open to bringing in the Greenway as a part of the resilience work. But even if that were established, then we're trying to get an answer from them actually right now. The cost and the financing options are undefined at this point, although we did have, the 2014 study did look at a number of financing options. Of course, federal funding right now is incredibly uncertain. So, you know.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, right. The federal government, remember that? So, you know, that's a big part, but before you even start to worry about the financing, you need to establish, is there an agency sponsor that can carry this forward? So the suggestion I made at the end of the meeting was that we would go back, talk to our New York City committee, which includes many of the agencies that were at the meeting, reach out to the MTA, who was not at the meeting because they weren't requested to be, but that was actually important because they're not interested in building a Greenway. The question is, would they be open to having one built right next to their right of way? But beyond that, there's the issue of with that resilience project in their capital plan, does that provide an opportunity? Do they have any position on that in terms of would they be willing to, again, not to commit to finance one, but to even consider one as part of the resilience work? That's what we're basically trying to find out right now. Our objective is to respond in writing to the 3 elected officials who requested the meeting, and obviously that would include the community board interests that have been there all along, and to just simply lay out what the situation is from the agency's mouths, you know. The agencies are our members and we work for them, and it's just a question of playing the coordinating role. If MTA were to come back and say, sure, we'll consider it in the design of the whatever the resilience project turns out to be, well, then it's a question of, okay, but who's gonna sponsor it? I would point out one other thing, which is, you know, assuming there was federal funding going forward, that the federal program is all the programs are reimbursement programs. So the sponsor doesn't just design the project, but pays the cost up front. And so, you know, it's whoever the sponsor is to be is really important. There was also, I think, Bob, it's important to point out, there was real interest from the city of Yonkers in that meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I think you and I, Jerry, were both struck by how enthusiastic the Yonkers and Westchester participants in the meeting were. Some of whom seem to be unfamiliar with the 2018 study.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of turnover there because of retirements. And so there are new people at the table from Yonkers.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about, as the 2018 study showed, ending at the Ludlow station, and then of course you have the bridge at Ludlow over the tracks. And they were talking about, well, okay, well, here's how we would get from there to the OCA.
Right.
And, you know, they were ready to lay out the street by street plan. I was very impressed with their enthusiasm.
Unfortunately, they didn't have the smallest segment.
Yeah, they did.
But they want to do it.
But still, if it's going to be what it's intended to be, which is a link between Manhattan and Westchester, that's gotta be part of it as well. After, you know, you can't just leave people at the Ludlow Bridge and say, now what?
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
And they're also doing a transit-oriented development project that's focused on actually, it's them and Metro North, it's focused on the Ludlow station. So there's a lot of planning around Ludlow right now. Of course, there's the sugar plant on the riverside.
Right. but that's just north of the Ludlow Bridge, as I recall.
South,
Well, I said, as I recall.
yeah, right, I think it might be south.
Maybe it's south,
It's
I
in
don't
the
know.
vicinity.
And the
of-
sewage plant.
I'm sure, yeah, the sewage plant as well,
We,
yeah.
that's
But there
bad.
is a street there, Fernbrook Street, that's on the east side of the plant.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's not, at that point, you may, you know, that may be one of the places where you're not on the river anymore, you're just inland.
Right,
But, you know, really, you're still pretty close to the river.
yeah, and in the 2014 plan, we had laid out which local street, Buena Vista Avenue and so forth, we
Right.
had laid that all out. And
Right.
yeah, you're not at the waterfront there, but you can get back down to it pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, they're redeveloping downtown Yonkers, they've been doing that for quite some time, so
Right.
that sort of fits in with that activity
I have a
also.
question, but I could.
So there's a question up there too, actually.
Well, let me,
Yeah.
let me say one thing before that. One thing which you didn't mention, Jerry, but, I'm not even sure we knew this when we held the meeting, is that, on the Henry Hudson Bridge, the lower level,
Right,
there now is a full lane
yep,
for, bikes and pedestrians, where before there was something about the width of a bicycle.
barely.
Yeah,
And-
and, which now means there is a feasible route
mhm.
between Manhattan and the Bronx, whereas before it was, you know, it just wasn't. In the plan, we had cantilevers and all sorts
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
other things, and now that's been obviated by the new
Right.
lane.
Which would have obviously added to the cost.
Yeah,
One of the things, but even that's not very direct, because you have to get to the Henry Hudson Bridge.
Oh, right.
From the Manhattan waterfront, Greenway.
that's right.
That's not easy to do, you have to go over the tracks and up the hill and blah, blah, blah.
It is my understanding that that's going to be changed, that the Parks Department has a plan for renovation in that area.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
everybody, yes, you know, the one and only time I actually took that route and found out I had to carry my bike up the steps, down the steps, over.
Right.
And, you know, plenty of other people have made the same complaint. So it is my understanding that's going to be addressed.
Okay.
But then, of course, on the Bronx side, you still have to get from the
You have to get
bridge down to the
down,
waterfront.
And that was a challenge structurally too. And,
Yeah,
That used
yeah.
part of Riverdale Park to do that.
Yeah.
In the 2014 plan. The obvious direct route would be across the swing bridge. At the
Yeah.
waterfront. And again, I don't know what's changed, if anything, but we were told that if a new bridge is built, that they would consider that.
Yeah,
But the existing bridge, because it has to move, can't be built off the side, and they really,
Right.
at the time, which was, you know, closer into 9/11, they really didn't want anyone near the bridge at
Yeah.
that point, you know.
yeah, I mean, that's a situation we'll have to monitor as well, yeah.
Right.
So, all right, well, before we go to, the other question, Lori, you said you had a
I mean, I
question?
could wait until it's over.
You wanna wait?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, all right.
Ready.
Can you, yeah,
Allegra?
Oh,
There you go.
hi there. Hi there, Allegra Legrand. Cliff, I think I met you at the Greenways conference back in September, maybe. Allegra Legrand, I am a resident of Inwood who does a lot of shopping in Riverdale, and I commute into, downtown Manhattan. So I'm pretty keenly interested in your last question, which is that, the connection from Van Cortlandt Park up and over a huge hill back down to the waterfront is significant amount of topography for a greenway, especially if you're going to have people on foot or on traditional bikes. And with this new lower level of the Henry Hudson Parkway Bridge having this very, very nice, I don't know if folks have had a chance because it barely opened about 6 weeks ago to walk over this new pedestrian path. It pretty much dumps you out at where Capic and Independence run into each other. So if there were more plans thinking about connecting a greenway or protected bike lanes to that intersection and north, I know like the Croton Aqueduct Trail, it's not really like on the water level. It's more on that level that you get dumped out at when you exit the Henry Hudson Parkway on the north side. And thinking about folks commuting from points north, they probably wouldn't be on the Croton, using it as a transportation network. Probably wouldn't be on the Croton Trail. They probably would be on, the old trail that does end in Van Cortlandt, and trying to consider like how changes in topography mesh with the potential path. I'm just curious if there's like how this has factored into the consideration. I also was told by some parks folks that even on the inward side of the bridge, actually, a major barrier to that being that Henry Hudson bridge path being a barrier to commute is that there's um, a staircase that you have to you have to transverse down. But I've been told that the MTA actually has maintenance or ownership or sovereignty over that greenway between the George Washington Bridge and the Henry Hudson Bridge. So I would love to see, like, I can't seem to find online that 2018 study. I would, if you have a link to it, I would appreciate it if you could post it. And I'm just curious about that heterogeneity of like who has authority over the different various segments of the Greenway, and like thinking about the Greenway not only in context of like Community Board 8, but how like a transportation network that was really connecting communities from Westchester into Manhattan, what would be the most functional for people who are in smaller, mostly person-powered vehicles would look like.
You raised a couple of questions, one of which we were just talking about, which is on the inward side of the Henry Hudson Bridge, and as we were discussing, at the present time, the staircase over the Amtrak tracks is an obstacle, but the Parks Department intends to address that. On the other side, the old Croton Aqueduct Trail is really something that might be a connection up in Westchester, not in the Bronx. And up in Westchester, it's more elevated, and there are several places where you have a very good view of the river, although you're not that close to the river. The question of access points is a very big question and will have to be addressed at some point. Topography, I believe you said this, Jerry, but if you didn't, I'll say it on behalf of both of us. Topography is a real problem because the riverfront is the low point, and much of Riverdale, Kingsbridge, the whole Northwest Bronx is elevated. So the question of access points will come up. The 2018 study, I'm pretty sure it is on the Community Board 8 website. If you go to committees and then you go to special committee on the Hudson River Greenway, that study should be available right there. I know it is also available on the website of the Greenway, which is greenwaylink.org. So you should be able to find this study in both of those places. But thank you for your comments, Allegra.
And one other thing, Bob, I think the jurisdictional issues are huge here.
Yes.
The fragment, who owns what.
Right, we've got, we've got the Bronx and Yonkers, and then if, you want to go into Manhattan, we've got that as well. Yeah,
Maybe
okay, sure, go ahead.
This
Mark.
segues into what
Hmm?
a couple of years ago, several years ago, Bob and I met with the different organizations. We met with the College of Mount St. Vincent, we met with the Hebrew Home, the Yacht Club.
Yep.
Everyone had their concerns, everyone had their issues. The college might have been interested in an easement, the Yacht Club had their,
Right.
riparian rights.
Uh-huh.
Is it time, or is it too soon to have more communication with these organizations again, or better to wait? Or, and have they been factored in to your
They certainly
planning?
factored into
I'm
the
sure they were,
2014
but
study,
yeah. Should we update our communication with them? I don't know if they were at these meetings or whatever. We had these one-on-one with several,
Yeah.
you know, all along the river.
I mean, my gut feeling is that until you establish who would be doing this, it's probably premature.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
Again, we'll go to them
Right,
like we
right,
did
right.
10 years ago and say, hey, and then okay, you can do this, you can do that, but when is it gonna happen?
right,
Right.
right,
We
okay.
don't know
Yeah.
that, yeah.
No, I mean, we're well aware of the yacht club. The yacht club, actually, I think the yacht club has already used their riparian rights. They actually said that at one point. But they still need access to the river.
Mhm.
You know, we can't put something between the yacht club and the river that will inhibit any access to the river. Otherwise, you know, the yacht, what's the point of the yacht club if you can't get to the river?
Yeah.
Right.
So, I think, and I'll hold off on my comments on this, until we take some more questions. I think the next step is the MTA. That's what we need to do next, and I don't think we're yet in a position to go back to others, the yacht club or Mount St. Vincent or anyone else at
Right.
this point.
Right.
We will, of course, have to go
They
back.
also have experience changing up the guards, so anybody we spoke
yeah,
2 years
yeah,
ago
yeah, right.
is not there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there's a
I'm
new
just throwing
precedent.
that out, you
Yeah,
know?
there's a new precedent of
Right.
Mount St. Vincent,
Yes.
which is now a university.
Right.
Deb, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, well, I wanted to ask a question when you were done.
No, go right ahead.
Just that you're talking about just needing an agency.
Right.
Are there some
Sponsor.
agencies that are a better fit than other agencies
Well-
or more likely?
Again, the sponsor has to put up the initial, you know, they get reimbursed 80% of what they're putting up, so. The city is obviously well placed to do, I mean, I shouldn't say that because everybody's got budget issues, but in
Well-
terms of who can generate the money in the first instance.
Well, right,
would
I
think
just think
the
like the
city.
Parks Department doesn't have a capital budget, right? But DEP or DOT,
I think Parks doesn't have, but
the
No,
Parks Department
no,
doesn't.
They don't, Sharon.
really?
Yeah, they really don't.
Because they do
Astonishing
a lot
as
of
that
projects,
seems.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all allocations from the
Yeah.
electeds.
Okay, I
or
stand
from
corrected.
discretionary fund-
Yeah.
Well,
discretionary funds.
But I do agree with you, Jerry, that I think the city is a
Yeah.
likely candidate. The city has two Greenway coordinators, one in the Parks Department and one in DOT.
Right,
And these people have been there for a while and they're quite knowledgeable. You know, that, of course, if the city does it, then we're talking about up to the city line. And then,
Well,
you know,
we would.
yeah,
we would have
Yonkers
to
and
bring
Westchester
Yonkers,
would have to
yeah.
be involved at that point.
But that's a detail at that point, you know, most of the complicated stuff is in the
Is
city.
in the city, yes, it is,
So-
right.
right, because it sounds a lot in many ways like the Tibbetts Brook project, right, where you've got DEP doing the resilience work. With DOT and Parks kind of overlaying with it,
Yeah, with the Greenway,
with the
yeah,
Greenway.
yeah. Let's, do we have other questions? Oh, yeah, we do.
Joseph, oops.
Yeah, I got a question, guys. Can you hear me? You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay. So sorry I was 10 minutes late. I apologize. My name is Joey Bohm. So regarding champions, my first question is, Richie Torres was not our congressman until I want to say about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, until the districts were swapped with Jamal Bowman. He is apparently planting a race, planting to run for governor. He has obviously deep federal connections and maybe possibly soon deep state connections. So my first question is, to what extent has Richie been informed of this project, because it was historically outside of his district, and now he is our congressman? The second question is more of a hypothetical. If there was a wealthy funder who was willing to contribute for this project, how much of that would this solve? Meaning, is the issue really money, or is the issue really coordination? There's a guy named Barry Diller on the west side of Manhattan. He owns a company called Interactive Corp. I think he built Pier 54, which is a man-made pier structure. That's a little island.
Yeah,
And he funded that basically out of his own, but he had to coordinate that with the local municipalities and, you know, jurisdictions. So my questions are twofold. Number one is, could Richie Torres be a champion for us? Is he aware of the project? And number two is, to what extent is this issue at this point money versus coordination?
All right, so Joey, thank you. It's good to hear you. On the question of Richie Torres, yes, he is aware of it. Both his chief of staff and somebody else on his staff, who is a cyclist and understands this project, are very enthusiastic about it. So Torres is not only aware of it, he's in favor of it. As far as what he can do for it, I'm afraid at the present time, the answer is very little. Because, as you know, the political situation in Washington, and Torres doesn't have a whole lot of clout, and whatever he decides to do, you know, in the future, is really less important than who holds the purse strings in Washington D.C. But he is in favor of the project, absolutely. With regard to Barry Diller, we'll give him an escorted tour up here, if you can get him up, Joe. You know, it's the major hurdle at the moment is not the money. The major hurdle at the moment is the MTA Metro North. They've got a project, and we'll talk some more about this as the meeting goes on. They've got, as Jerry was saying, a resiliency project on the Hudson, and we need to sit down with them and find a way that resiliency project can work both for them and for us. That's our most immediate pressing need at the moment. Money is a huge problem, but we're not ready for that, to tackle that problem quite yet.
And Bob, I would just add that I'm waiting for a response from them in terms of that question.
Well, since you said that, Jerry, that I had actually made a note about that. Well, what do you think is a reasonable amount of time before we've really got to turn up the pressure?
I think, let's see, so it's March almost.
Right.
Yeah, I think the people I'm working with are trying to get that answer at the MTA, but the MTA is a big thing,
Right.
you know, so I would say another couple of weeks probably.
Okay.
Again, we owe a reply on behalf of our co-chairs to 3 elected officials.
Right.
So, you know, and the people who I've spoken with at the MTA are aware of the fact that this isn't just coming from, well, I should put it this way, it's not coming from the staff, it's not coming from the community
Right.
board, but there are elected officials who were requesting
Right.
this, so that, you know, we need an answer relatively soon. So
Okay.
I think the people I'm working with, they're trying diligently to get an answer, but they have to go internally to whoever they have to go to, you know.
All right.
It's
that's
not in
good,
their
yeah.
capital plan right now, for sure, but the resilience project is, you know, so
Yeah.
it's just a question of, are they open to allowing the design of the resilience project to include or dovetail with a Greenway possibility, you know?
Yeah. Well, I have a further thought on that, but I'll defer that for the moment because I know we have other questions.
Jody, you're next.
Hi there. Boy, this is like old home week 29 years later. I see Bernie Stein. I see Laura. Back from when I was on the Bronx Advisory Committee and helped draft that 1998 report, it sounds like we're still in the same position. We don't have a lead agency. MTA isn't against it, but they're not for it, and there's no funding. So it's kind of frustrating. I'm very patient, but 3 decades is a very long time. So I have a couple of questions and comments. One, when Hebrew Home applied for their ULURP to build the river's edge, I did negotiate into the community agreement that they would provide access to the Hudson River Greenway through their property if it was ever built. So that's one piece that we were missing last time was, you know, the access through their property. So that addresses some of the private property things. 2, I read maybe last year that Amtrak was exploring activating the 2nd track that is on the swing bridge. That bridge was supposedly built as a dual track bridge. So I was wondering if that was it. And then Jerry, I'll give you the 3rd question so you can answer all at once. And then what exactly is in MTA's resiliency plan? Because we've heard or I've read different snippets of things that they were going to just keep hardening the shore with riprap, that they were exploring raising the tracks, but that was a crazy amount of money due to the grade and everything, that they've already with Sandy money lifted all the wiring up. There's all these steel fixtures along the river. So those were the couple of things that were popped into my head at this point. And then if anybody wants the archives, I'm cleaning out my files. It's the 30th anniversary of the Friends of Spite and Dival this year. So I'm like, I should do a report. So I've got like a whole file cabinet of Greenway stuff from the 90s. So that's where I am now. All right. So was that enough for you, Jerry?
Sure, sure.
Well, let me take the
Yeah,
first question.
good.
Jody, first of all, I mean, thanks. I know you were there, way back in the early days, when the Vanderbilts were still around and laying the tracks. But thank you for your pioneering.
It's all that
efforts,
outdoor
Jody.
living that I look this young.
With regard to the Hebrew home, we've confirmed just recently that yes, they, are agreeable to an easement across their property if and when the Greenway is built.
Great.
So that's correct, and that offer still stands. With regard to the MTA, Jerry, we don't really know yet
We
what
just
their
know that there's-
resiliency plan is.
Right, they don't know either.
Right, yeah,
They
they
have an
haven't.
item in their capital plan.
Yeah.
And it says resiliency work on the Hudson line or whatever, that would have to be designed.
Right,
And that's that's where the opportunity is, I think, in that, in terms of, are they open to, in the design process, to considering this,
right.
If they had it already designed, then we'd be in a little different position, I think, but it's not. And there was an earlier resilience plan too, and around the 2018 plan, I believe.
Mhm.
That, I recall from back then reading that, the idea of somehow building the Greenway into the resilience work, if they're gonna put a wall up or something,
Mhm.
or some type of building up the riprap. So we really don't know much about, and I'm sure they don't either, because they haven't really designed, the work, they've just identified it in their capital plan.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
so
and they had a
Jody-
lot of turnover too, Jerry. All of the people, Bob Rubenfeld is gone. I can't
Right.
remember his name, but their communications department is all new and consolidated. So it's almost like
Yep.
starting from scratch. And what Joseph mentioned is letting all the people know that were players before, because everybody's different now except a couple of us old timers.
And even more turnover, because Kathy Rinaldi is retiring, so,
Mhm.
there'll be a new
The
president.
people we dealt with in the 2018 study
Right.
are all gone.
They're all
now.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We
So-
would never get that study now from these new people. Never. That
Yeah.
was a
Well, they
moment in
probably-
time, and
They may not even
Senator
know
Klein
about
was
it.
very instrumental
So,
in getting that grant and getting them
Yeah.
to do that.
So what has happened, Jody, is that, when we met in January of last year, the resiliency was in the 20-year needs assessment, but since then it's moved into the 5-year capital plan. So it's moved up in terms of, urgency, let's say. You're right about, the work that has been done post Sandy with this, they used the Sandy money to, harden their infrastructure by raising the switches onto, platforms several feet above grade. And then also encasing the cables, their electrical cables in all that, metallic encasing that you see all along the Hudson River line. But as Jerry said, our next immediate goal is to sit down with the MTA and talk about the design of whatever this resiliency project is going to be. So thank you.
Was there a second question that we missed?
Amtrak,
It was-
the Amtrak
Yeah,
adding a
right,
second
right,
track
right.
across the bridge.
I've seen that too, and Amtrak got a lot of money from the current Infrastructure Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so it kind of tick off something in my head about, I wonder if they're gonna replace the swing bridge, but there is space for a second track on the swing bridge. It has to be, it can't be immobile, I mean, it's a navigable waterway, so whatever structure is there has to be able to open. And that does put some limitations on what they can do with it. I don't know the exact reason why it became a one-track bridge, except that for many years there was no service on the Empire Line, and then when service was reestablished on the Empire Line, they rehabilitated the bridge. But is it possible they would be looking to replace that bridge? I guess anything's possible. I don't know
Yeah.
that for sure. That's the
They spent a
opportunity
ton
there.
of work. They were driving pilings in and they did a crazy amount of work
Yeah.
with Sandy money that was put on pause during the pandemic. But they were pile driving to stabilize the bridge, like 100 feet down. It was ridiculous. And Rob Rubenfeld from Amtrak, who was back there in 2018, he retired as well. So like the people that were looped in there are also, and I'm retired. So yeah, it's these longer time frames. Sometimes we have to keep repeating it to all the new people who may
Sure.
not even know about it.
So Jody, Allegra again, can I ask you a question? If you were to update your ideal path to connect Riverdale to Yonkers and points beyond and to Manhattan, could you draw that ideal path? Because for me, as much as I despise the hill, people don't actually live on the
Maybe you
water.
want to have a conversation offline.
I would love to
Yeah.
see like, well, in the presentation that we were shown, it was like a straight line between the northern end of Van Cortlandt Park and the river, which is not a realistic approximation. But has someone made a like I'm not so intimately like, I usually take the Putnam Rail Trail when I go to points north of Riverdale, to be honest with you, because it is nicely paved. They recently, Westchester, they got rid of all the old rail ties so that it's nice and smooth through the bulk of getting all the way up to Tarrytown.
Allegra, I'm sorry to interrupt you. That's a totally different path from what we're talking about.
But
That's
actually,
on-
Bob, no, because part of it is that the Bronx Advisory Committee's recommendations were to do the Putnam Trail. It was also to not do a singular path, but it was to do phases of multiple paths. It was very upsetting to be in the Parks Committee meeting last night, felt like it was a week ago, last night, and hear that the Palisade Avenue path along Riverdale Park is in such disrepair because in 1998, that was our proposed phase one, is to fix that path, and Assemblymember Dinowitz had even committed funding for it, but it became an outcry, especially from transportation alternatives and a few people who didn't live in this neighborhood full time, that it was the river or nothing. And 29 years later, we've gotten nothing, but now at least we have the Putnam. So I think it's all linked, and I think that part of it is not being so on the river, because many miles of the Hudson River Greenway is not on the river. The legislation says leads to visual or physical access. So
Right.
I think
Jody, so Jody, with respect, what we're talking about is the 2018 study, okay, which is a study that is along the river. I understand that as you go farther up the Hudson, and we were just talking about this in Westchester, you're on the Old Croton Aqueduct Trail, which is not right along the river. But what we're talking about in the Bronx is a riverfront greenway. That's what the community board voted for. That's what most of the people in the community want. Like Allegra, I love the Putnam Trail. I take it up into Westchester just as she does. That's a parallel trail. It's the Empire State Trail. It's not what we're talking about tonight. So we have a couple of other questions.
Yeah, so Cliff is next, and
Yeah.
then Bob Moore.
Yeah,
Bob
kind of to segue off of, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we hear
Yeah.
you. Cliff.
Okay, so to segue off of what you were just talking about, and to address Allegra's question earlier about, how to bridge the, no pun intended, the topography to get from the up to the down. The page 6 of the 2018 plan addresses specifically how it envisioned creating a skyway from the Spuyten Duyvil station down to the proposed trail. So that's number one. Number two, I don't want to lose. I think it's definitely worth noting, while we, of course, express frustration over how slow this is happening, is to just reiterate that crossing the river getting across from on the Hudson River Bridge, that was, you know, when I first joined the fund about 12 years ago, that was seen as possibly the biggest impediment on how to connect Manhattan to the Bronx, and that's done now. And the proximity of that outlet into the Bronx to this potential sky ramp from the Spuyten Duyvil station really, you know, gets us close to what we were hoping for. And the last point I would like to make is that, you know, getting into the politics of this, not only is Richie Torres familiar with this, but Andrea Stewart Cousins is also in our corner. And I don't know if you heard the news today, Richie Torres threw his hat in the ring with, threw his support behind someone who might become our mayor. And he, through Jeff Klein from years ago, was familiar at least with the project. We met years ago with his the state parks department. So, you know, I think there are, you know, again, the raw materials are there and are possibly assembling. So I think we are definitely in a better place than we were, you know, certainly pre-pandemic, even though the federal funds are certainly in question.
Thanks, Cliff. Bob?
I'll try to be brief with this. Bob Morrow from Yonkers. I've been a paddler from the Yonkers Paddling Club that we set up for quite a number of decades. We have about 220 members already. There's a number of things that would be helpful to know here. One is, of course, what we've been returning to is most people think that in 5 years that a good deal of the track will start being underwater whenever there's a high tide with a storm. This is a problem. They have to address that. We can be part of addressing that. And I think there's a change in the mood in the Yonkers government to support all this at this point. Certainly, the Ginsburg, who's been developing at Ludlow Station, is also promised to build a pathway that could be used as a bike walk pathway above the tracks that takes you to the downtown Yonkers railroad connection, after which you can come back to the river. So that solves one of the problems of getting the elevation through all those new apartment buildings through there. There is a pathway, and there's been an offered pathway, I should say. And those are the main things I wanted to bring up, except there's a tremendous amount of support in Yonkers now for doing this work. And I think as the folks who own the rails have got to know that they're going to be underwater, you have to address all these things. We should address them together.
Yeah, Bob, thank you for those comments. I'm not sure whether you heard the beginning of the meeting, because that's exactly what we were talking about, is that the MTA Metro North does recognize now that they've got a big problem, potential problem, and they've got to address it. And as Jerry and I were saying, that's really the very next issue that we want to deal with, which is to sit down with representatives from Metro North and talk about what their resiliency project looks like and how we might be able to marry their resiliency project with what we need to do for the Greenway. And that we also remarked earlier on the enthusiasm we saw in the big Zoom meeting we had on the part of Yonkers and Westchester. So I do remember a meeting some years ago with a Yonkers official who was not at all enthusiastic about the Greenway, and the situation really seems to have changed quite considerably.
Yeah, Lee retired.
Yes, Lee retired.
I'm having lunch with him tomorrow.
Tell him I said hello.
Yeah, give him our best wishes. Do we have any other questions?
I think that's it.
Okay.
I'm gonna move on to the next slide.
Well, there isn't one.
Is that it?
Yeah, no, we've done the slide, but I do have a couple of other things I wanted to mention tonight. With regard to, sitting down with the MTA, the Hudson Valley Greenway Authority does provide funding for engineering studies. And I know, you know, when we finally do have that conversation with the MTA, my guess is they're going to say, well, you know, some of this is going to cost more than what we really need to do, or something like that. And I'm anticipating that conversation and thinking the Hudson Valley Greenway Authority is a possible resource for us. I don't know whether, Jerry, you have any thoughts about any other agency that we might turn to? You know, if we face a situation where, well, Metro North is satisfied with X, but to do what we want, we need X and Y, and where's the funding for Y coming from?
Well, yeah, so the issue there is, they're gonna be designing something. Are they open to bringing this into that design? Not necessarily designing it themselves, though, is what you're saying, and then someone else would have to come and design it, so. Yeah, that authority would be a potential source, and then there could be, funding through the city too. I'm saying New York City, not.
Right,
City
right,
beyond
right,
this.
yeah.
That's always a possibility. We talk about design work, it's not as expensive as obviously building this thing. So, but again, the key question, and the one I'm hoping to resolve at least somewhere, somehow, is Metro North open to even that? You know, as they're designing whatever the resilience project is going to be, that they take this into account. And either they add it into the design, or they allow someone to come in and work with them on a design that would be, combine the resilience project with the Greenway. I don't know the answer to that, and that's what I'm trying to get. You know, that's really a starting point. If their answer is no, we're not even interested in that, then you've got a lot of, you got a bigger road to hoe, you know?
Right, well, if that's their answer, then we need the elected officials to step in and say, look, you know, we want this project. I mean, this is an engineering question, it seems to me.
You don't need
That's
another
all.
feasibility.
Right, it's not, right, it's not like we're trying to, you know, send a rocket to Mars.
Or build a little island.
Somebody else.
Right, yeah, this is, somebody else is doing that. I'll stop from any further political commentary. So I don't, I guess what I'm saying, Jerry, is I don't think no is a tenable position for Metro North. That may be their position, but, you know, this is something that can be done.
But again, you know, keep in mind that no, if it is a no, has to go back in our response to the three electeds that asked for the meeting. You know? So
Which is
they'll know about it.
Right, which is exactly my point, that, you know, at that point, we go back to the elected officials and say, here's their answer.
Here's their answer.
Yeah, okay.
So, but that would seem, if there's any willingness to consider this, that would seem to be the first thing to try to ferret out.
Yes, absolutely.
And the same thing with the city, and is there any willingness to consider this to be an active part of their greenways plan?
The greenways, the city has a greenways map.
Right.
That shows, you know, I mean, the most immediate issue for the greenway, for the city is the greenway, the continuous greenway around Manhattan. And they just built that, fantastic, East Midtown Greenway, which is, you know, the gold standard for greenways.
Right.
If, you know, if budget were not a consideration, that's the greenway we would all want to build.
Sure.
But anyway, the city has a commitment to expanding greenways right now.
But while they were doing that, and that is their priority, they also, as was noted, they did the Putnam line.
Yeah.
And so that was the city, I mean, up until the Westchester line.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's been done recently. So again, where does this all fit in their Greenway plan?
Yeah, okay.
It wasn't clear from Ted Wright's presentation. The answer to that question wasn't clear.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree
He
with you.
sort of alluded to it, but he didn't say that's next or anything like that.
Yeah, he took a certain amount of umbrage at the amount of money, when I brought up the amount of money that was spent on the East Midtown Greenway, which is approximately the amount of money we're talking about for the entire Greenway between Spuyten Duyvil and Ludlow.
Yep, absolutely. So, So if I can, you know, and I'm actually retiring at the end of May, I think I told you that.
Yes,
so-
I know, you told me.
Oh, my
Yes.
goodness.
But you know, certainly, you know, I'm trying to definitely have at least an answer to the elected officials before then.
Mhm.
My boss wants that, and that would also be shared with you all, you know, so.
Right.
And then I guess if you, you know, for a fee, I can design.
I was just gonna say, I think I smell a consultancy opportunity here. Yeah.
Oh, I thought we'd asked you to join our committee.
I'd be happy to come in and.
Resident of community.
We
board.
do, that's true. We do, Jerry, that's true. Laura's right. We do have community committee members.
Yeah.
Right.
And you live in the
I live in the
community.
community,
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but.
But we might be able to come up with a little loose change too, so.
Why not? That wouldn't be.
Okay.
I'm not an engineer, so I can't design anything, okay?
That's all right.
I'm just a planning guy.
Yeah, you know people. That's
Yeah.
that's important.
And this is really complicated when it comes to the different
Yeah.
agencies that are involved.
Oh, I see that Jessica Heller has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I hope this isn't an obvious question, but how do we, any one of these people, get to the table when the MTA is doing their resiliency design work? Meaning my biggest fear is that, oh, they haven't done it yet, and then they come up with something without, right, it would be great if we get in beforehand, it'll be cheaper, faster, all that. So what's the process for that? And who would it be?
I think the best thing I can offer on that is that usually when they're doing a project implementation plan or pursuing project implementation, they have an advisory committee. And if they were open to considering this, you would think that there might be some openness to including people from the community in the advisory committee, you know, and that would be the entree into being in the process. I can't speak for them. I don't know if that's what they would do, but that would be the objective, would be to get, if this is part of the design, to have input into the design directly.
So how do we proactively ask that question? Or who do we proactively ask that question to?
Well, there's no there yet. So let me get the answer and see where they are. And then at that point, you take off from there, you know? At least you know what they officially say to local elected officials about their position with regard to the resilience project and the Greenway. I think that's a launch point for you.
But we put it to the local electeds to submit into them. Please have my people involved in your advisory committee. Because that we could do to remind them. Remind all the local electeds to make that request.
Well, we've been, Jessica, I'm not sure whether you were on the Zoom from the beginning of the meeting, but we were talking
was.
about that.
I
Okay.
was.
Okay, so.
No,
we've
but
been
this,
talking-
no, you didn't talk. I was on the Zoom the whole time. You didn't talk about that. We talked about, yes, they're in favor of it, they're in support of it, and they're at the meetings, but we didn't talk like making a specific, I'm just afraid that these processes are moving on without us somewhere else. And what we're going to get a notification that designs are done, or this is a plan, or they're asking for funding or something that doesn't take into account what we want to take into account. So the sooner we come together and the design process includes the resiliency and the plans for the Greenway from the beginning, the more efficient, the more cost effective, and the better it'll be for us. So
Agreed, but that's exactly what Jerry has been talking about. He is in the process of setting up a meeting with the MTA Metro North. He's talked to some people who say, you know, well, they have to talk to somebody else. I mean, that's not gonna go on indefinitely. And the point of this is we want to be in there at the ground level while
Yes.
they're making this decision about
Yes.
what the design of this resiliency will be.
And Bob,
Yes.
just
Go ahead,
one
Jerry.
detail is that it's really the MTA itself, not Metro North specifically at this point.
Right,
So it's the MTA homeworld, as we call it.
okay.
That's where we're, you know, gonna try to find the answer to if there's, and those people who I'm dealing with are obviously, talking to MTA management.
Mhm.
I just want to be proactive in asking specifically for being at, right? We all agree we want to be at the table. I'm just like, what can we do to make sure of it? And what I think I heard is that we can ask the electeds to ask that question specifically for us. I think that's what.
Yeah, the electeds are looped in. I mean, the whole reason NIMTIC is doing this in the first place is that the electeds asked NIMTIC to get involved, to sit down with the different jurisdictions and with the MTA. And we had the meeting with the different jurisdictions. Now we're trying to set up, Jerry's trying to set up the meeting with the MTA. So yes, we want to be in there at the ground level, Jessica, exactly as you said. We have the same goal in mind.
All right, I think,
Jody's back. Mhm.
Jody's back. I'm getting a little bit confused. When you're saying that MTA doesn't know what their resiliency plan is, are you talking about specifically which of their things they're putting where? Because their spring, what is it? Spring 2024, they did come out, MTA did come out with a climate resilience plan, and it specifically said the Hudson line, and that they were, one of their goals was to put the equipment on platforms, which we started to see them do. They were going to, everybody's thinking about flooding, but the bigger problem were all the mudslides. During Hurricane Floyd, I think it was the Ossining Station was 8 feet under mud. There was that huge mudslide up in, I want to say Dobbs Ferry, but I don't think it was. We had the mudslide at Villa Charlotte during Hurricane Sandy. So that's in their resilience plan. There was what I mentioned, elevating the tracks, and building up I call it riprap, but they had a different name for it, but I don't remember, building up the riprap instead of building what they had told us was a 5-foot wall. But their most recent plan that I looked at had them just adding like a rock rubble wall. So that's what I'm confused about is the thing that you're saying that they don't know exactly which of these things are going where, or have they changed their mind since spring?
I don't think they've changed their mind. I think, once you establish that you're going to do something in a plan, you have to go design it. And so they may have options, including the rubble wall or whatever. And now they have to go in and actually do the engineering and pick a preferred alternative and say, this is what we're going to do. So it can be in a plan for sure, but you don't build off a plan. You got to build off the physical arrangement of whatever it is you want to do. I don't think they've gotten there, Jody. I don't know that for sure, but I had no sense that they had a design for whatever they want to do on the Hudson line yet. They have some concepts, but you got to take concepts to design.
I'd
Right,
like
that
to
was my
just,
question, is whether the concepts and the things that they were talking about as solutions had changed, or is it just that they haven't figured out the details of those concepts? So I think you answered it, that they haven't figured out the design details of how can they do these things, whether they could do these things, and where they could do these things.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
thanks.
that's the case. I think that's the case, but I don't know that for certain because they don't tell us about the details of all their projects, obviously, but I'm almost certain that they're simply looking at different alternatives.
so
Yeah,
I'd like to
and
just
with-
add in,
Jody, with regard to the where question, there is no doubt that the Riverdale section is one of the lowest lying and one of the most vulnerable. That actually is in one of their documents. So we do know that, and yes, they have mudslides that they have to address as well. You're quite right about that. But we do know that where we are, a portion of the Greenway that we're talking about between Spuyten Duyvil and Yonkers is definitely one of the areas that they are going to have to address with regard to resiliency issues.
sorry, so I do live in Inwood, but I'm also a climate researcher, and I was not a lead author on the National Climate Assessment, and I do personally know the people who are lead authors on the New York City panel on climate change, and they just released their newest report in 2024, and they do make a distinction between nuisance flooding, like from high tides, between coastal storm surges from pluvial, like extreme rainfall, secondary effects like the mudslides, as Jody was mentioning, those folks certainly do. Have not read the MTA's climate resilience plan, which came out about synchronously with the New York City Panel on Climate Change's fourth assessment report. They both were out last spring. But I can say for certain that those were the same folks who were on the advisory committee for the New York, New Jersey HATS, which hasn't come up in our discussion now, but those, that was like the Army Corps of Engineers plan on, building gateways and whatever, walls. I think if you haven't incorporated that New York, New Jersey HATS, who knows, like if anything will come to fruition, but they did study the problem a lot. And I would be shocked if MTA did not tap into those same regional professionals. They're all kind of, tapped into the same projections for future sea level rise, future storm surge. I would say we have not great ideas about how extreme rainfall can become, and it's so heterogeneous. It's a really tricky thing to get around. But local low points, obviously, like the Hudson line, because it is right on the riverway. I know that we have drawn parallels to the Tibbetts Brook and this Greenway, but they're kind of different thing because the daylighting of Tibbetts Brooks is actually an extreme rainfall scenario, because that waterway currently, it's put into the sewer system there in Van Cortlandt. So anyway, we can follow up on this. Y'all can probably find me later on, but I'm almost positive it's the same scientists, legit professionals who are like feeding into these assessments.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I don't know, but I'm glad to hear that, and, we'll look into it. Thank you, Elaine.
One other point to consider, if I could, and I think we've probably beaten this to death at this point, is that, it's gonna have to do some kind of environmental assessment too. You're talking about the river,
Oh, yeah,
and even just adding, more riprap.
Right.
Has an environmental impact, so,
Right.
that's
Oh, yeah.
gotta be considered as part of the
We went
design.
they're gonna have to deal with DEC.
Right,
They probably will have to deal with the Army Corps as well.
and, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is not gonna happen overnight.
No, not at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why they probably don't have one concept, because they haven't looked at all that.
Yeah,
Normally in an environmental assessment or an EIS, you're looking at alternatives and you're
Mhm.
judging the impacts of the alternatives, so,
mhm,
that's gonna play a big role, because obviously it's the river.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
just- So,
We went to a
Okay.
meeting with New York City, the environmental impact, the division years ago, when I went
Okay.
down. Trying to remember, and they gave us a whole list of all the different agencies that we would have to be
Oh,
involved with.
yeah, there was
Remember?
some waterfront, person, I can't even remember
yes.
the name of the office, much less his name, but yes.
He said doable, but these were all, they gave us a big
Yeah, yeah.
list. Yeah.
It usually takes
yeah,
a
we know
couple of
that.
years to finish an environmental assessment.
Yeah,
Really.
yeah, no, we know, no, we're not even up to that stage yet,
Right.
but we will.
Share a
we
brain
will
on
have
this.
to- Yeah.
Oh,
And you're adding-
That's a scary thought.
That segues.
We will,
into design
yeah.
work.
Right. All right, I think we've addressed the whole MTA resiliency issue.
Yeah, and again,
pretty thoroughly.
I
I know
would just
you're-
urge everyone that, there'll be an answer. I don't know what it'll be, but there'll be an answer from the MTA that'll be responded to the local electeds.
Yeah,
And from the city, frankly, too.
Good.
So, and that's, when you have that, you'll know something about what they're all thinking
mhm,
or not thinking. So,
yeah. So okay, so moving on, just, quickly, this won't take too long. I just wanted to report on a couple of other things. Last September, representing the Friends of the Hudson River Greenway, I attended a citywide Greenways Coalition meeting. I guess the first thing I should say is that there is a citywide Greenways Coalition. Greenways groups from every borough were represented there, even Staten Island, to my amazement. So, and it was a great networking opportunity for everybody to meet everybody else, understand what works in their neighborhood. And while most of it is not transferable from one neighborhood to another, some of it was. And one of the conversations at that meeting had to do with a study of greenways that had been done by the Brooklyn Greenways Initiative. And one of the things they found out, which when you think about it, seems perfectly logical, is that most most of the people who use greenways in certain areas live in those areas. It's not so much that people are coming in, you know, we're talking about a greenway here to connect to Manhattan and Yonkers. And I'm sure we will get, you know, when the day comes, we'll get people from Manhattan, we'll get people from Westchester. But the majority of the people using it will most likely be from this area, from Riverdale and Kingsbridge. That's what their studies have shown. The other thing that I found interesting was, and again, not surprising, that the main uses of greenways are transportation and recreation, which is more common, depends upon the demographics of the area. So if you're in a more heavily populated area, the people using the greenways tend to be people using it primarily for transportation. So for example, in Williamsburg, most of the people who were questioned were actually going to work or, you know, doing that sort of thing, whether it was elsewhere in Brooklyn or Manhattan. When you get into less densely populated areas, it's more recreation than it is transportation. So I share that for what it's worth. You didn't have to go downtown to the Greenways meeting to hear this. So, so there you go, but it's going to be an annual event. And I think, you know, maybe I buried the lead here. I think the main thing to take away from this is that there is a citywide Greenways network. I mean, the Friends of the Hudson River Greenway are part of it, and there are the Harlem River Group is part of it, and in every borough. So it's expertise that's being passed along and shared, problems, solutions, etc. It's a great group, and we had all the same Greenways people that showed up at our Zoom meeting. Right. The DOT commissioner was there and so on. So I passed that along. One other thing I wanted to mention is that just last weekend, Laura, Deb, and myself were all at the Bronx Park Speak Up, where the theme this year was waterfront access. And we had a panel, because it's the Bronx Park Speak Up, we had a panel of 5 people representing different Greenways groups in the Bronx. 3 of which, interestingly, are HRG, the Hudson River Greenway, the Harlem River Greenway, and the Hutchinson River Greenway. We also had the Great Success Story, which is representatives from the Bronx River Alliance, which has been just a fabulous story about how the Bronx River has been turned back into what it always was intended to be, which is a free-flowing natural area. And there's been a park constructed down in the South Bronx. I mean, it's a great success story. It really is. It's the model of what can happen. And there was a 5th group from South Bronx Unite, which is more concerned with the shorefront along the Long Island Sound. But you know, the theme was river access, which in the Bronx is very limited. And you know, as I said, we have no river access up here. We have a community called Riverdale, and you can't get to the river in Riverdale. But that's the way it is, and that's one of the issues that the Hudson River Greenway would address. It would provide access to the river for the first time. Beyond that, I did want to pass along one thing before we close, and again, if there are any questions, of course, ask them. I've had several people say how much they loved Riverfest and how much they miss it, and how much they wish there could be some sort of event like that again. And I've been thinking about that, and I hope we can all collectively put our heads together to see if we can recreate some version of Riverfest. It would have to be scaled down. It was a very expensive thing to do, required subsidy from elected officials to make it possible. But you know, and again, it highlights the river, it calls attention to the river and the importance of the river. So let's all think about how we might be able to do that. Again, as I say, maybe on a scaled down version, but still getting people down to the river for a day of enjoyment and enjoying the river. That would be fabulous.
Bob, just, I've never been to Riverfest. Where did it take place?
Mount St. Vincent.
Okay,
They have an area, if, I don't know whether you've ever been to Mount St. Vincent, but the main campus all lies on the east side of the tracks, but there's a small portion on the west side of the tracks. And there's actually a bridge right there on the campus that you can go over to get down, and that's where Riverfest was. Well, that's one of the places where Riverfest was held. It was also on the main part of the campus as well, down by the river. But the part that everybody loved, because that's where the boats docked, was the part west of the tracks, small that they own there.
Bob, if I could just jump in for a second, we also did a scaled down version of that on what we called Greenway Day, at Riverdale Station Park, which coincided with Earth Day. And the budget for that was about 1/10 of what Riverfest costs. So that might also be a viable possibility. It's not nearly as glorious as Mount St. Vincent, but it did the trick. And we got into the Riverdale front page of Riverdale Press both times.
Bob, I also think it's important to identify which part of Riverfest did people miss the most. We put a lot of effort into both the boats, but also the activities. I think the activities were great, but the main attraction was the boats. And if we had a scaled down Riverfest, it really should just be boats. If vendors want to come, we want to give people the opportunity to, and we want to charge them, fine. But
And
the real attraction, well, the music and the guy on stilts, walking on stilts, and the face paint for the kids. But my kids have epic memories from the fireboat. Epic. They still talk about it to this day.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was getting out on the water. It was, I forget whether we had the Clearwater or the other boat. Clearwater has two boats. I forget which one we had, but we had it. And there were, brief sails out on the river and back, the fireboat. Yeah, no, I agree with you. Whatever we do on the water, and yes, if there's music, that's a wonderful addition. If there's a clown or a stilt walker or face painting, that's great too. But it's about the river, yes, definitely. I think Bob Morrow has his hand up.
he's unmuted.
Yep, very, very briefly, April 26th, Rails Trails from the National Group. We're going to probably have an event at BZAC out in the park, and it's a little too early to put people on the water at that time, but as we do this into the summer, we will be more than happy to put together a large, and we will. This happens every year, putting people out in boats, and with the help of the paddling club and a number of other organizations that we'll be working with, and hopefully we'll be planning that in April when we have a Rails Trails, probably somewhat smaller event, but we do have 2-acre park and a big building with lots of bathrooms, so and a boathouse. If you haven't been there, it's a great place.
BZAC being in downtown Yonkers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Bob, and you just reminded me, we did have a conversation about doing something like that down in Riverdale, and I did approach the yacht club about whether they would be open to that, and the answer is no, they would not be open to that, because they're not a public park, as they said, and they don't have public events, and they didn't really feel that this was the event where they should change their policy. But yeah, let's find some way to do this that involves both the Yonkers and the Bronx.
Yep.
We ought to be able to do that. Yeah. Maybe not April 26th, as you said. That'd be a
Well,
bad
that's
time to.
too
Yeah,
cold.
it'd be a bad time to go overboard. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, good. Well, let's continue the conversation after the meeting. I don't mean literally after the meeting. I mean, let's just continue the
Other
conversation.
But that sounds
Yeah.
awesome. Like if you can just to the persons who participated here, like send out an invite. That sounds like really amazing, an amazing introduction to Hudson.
You bet.
We'll start out with a small group to see if we can make it doable, and then we'll make sure everybody knows about it.
Right. We can put 200 or
Good.
300 people out in that space. We do it all the time. So it's a good start.
Great.
Yeah, so Allegra, if the board office doesn't have your contact information, you should contact the board office.
I don't know if you have it. I signed up at that website that you guys said. Allegra Legrand, you will find me if you email me online. There's only one of me. If there's a chat box, I would just drop in my contact, allegrand@gmail.
Did you get an email notice about tonight's meeting?
I got an email from Jody. I replied to Jody. Please note to Bene that if you email me at my personal email address, which ends in Gmail, as opposed to my work email addresses, which are university and or agency, that there will be different responses. So if you want me to give you my real opinion, email me personally. Thank you.
Allegra, the best way to do this would be for you to email the community board office. And that's, it's bx08@cb.nyc.gov. bx08@cb.nyc.gov.
Okay. And how should I put the subject?
Mailing list.
Yeah, mailing list is a fine subject, yes. And we'll add you. Great, it was very nice to see
You'll
you
get
tonight.
everything.
Yeah, you'll get more than you want, but.
You and I have definitely met at the Greenways conference. We talked. You and I talked.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We did talk.
Yes. I was sitting here trying to figure out why the name was familiar, so, all right, yes, we did talk, you're right. Anything else? Hi, David. Oh, David?
Yes, I just simply want to acknowledge Jerry's work on our behalf over the years. I didn't realize you were retiring. You've presented to this and several other community board committees over the years, and I just want to thank you. Thank you for your service to NIMTIC. Thank you for the service and presentation to our board. Thank you for your friendship to us all.
You're welcome, and just doing my job, that's what am I supposed to do? But
Yeah,
appreciate the vibes.
Thank you for that, David, you're quite right, and I agree, yeah.
Jerry, I've gotten to know a lot of state employees over the years. I wouldn't call what you do just doing your job.
Oh, I appreciate that.
All right, but you're not
Thank you.
retired yet.
No, I'm not retired yet.
We're
That's
still
right.
waiting to
30 more
hear.
months.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you, Jerry.
Sure.
Okay, any other comments? Going once, twice? All right, everybody, have a good evening.
Good night.
Motion to-
Right.
Good night, all.
Motion to adjourn?
Good night,
Motion
all.
to adjourn, yeah.